Immigration and Foreign Affairs is always a topic that evokes much discussion. On the one hand, you have the unwavering proponents of a strict implementation of the Bahamianization policy, and on the other hand, the need to embrace the global citizen with international expertise to assist in the development of our country. Then there is also the question of a national immigration policy. With respect to foreign affairs, we tend to think that the Bahamas, being so small, has a minimal role to play on the global stage. However, due to our strategic location, sound economy, and stable government, we are well placed to exert influence, as well as leverage international relations to our advantage. Joining me in studio to discuss the issues relevant to immigration and foreign affairs is the Honourable Fred Mitchell, Minister with responsibility for immigration and foreign affairs. Welcome to Roundtable.
Great, it's like old times.
Exactly. Few people would know that perhaps what little activism still exists in me was perhaps planted by you. My first Labor Day March was with you.
That's right.
So thank you very much for opening my eyes and creating that national awareness.
That was fun.
Yes. So you've been quite busy, Minister. We'll start by talking about immigration policy. And I guess to ask you, just for the sake of our viewers who may not have a grasp as to the nature of your portfolio, as Minister, what is our national immigration policy? How do you go about crafting that?
Well, the basic principle is that Bahamians must come first, that the first call on the economic resources of the country should be for Bahamians. And so therefore, no one should get a work permit unless a Bahamian is not available for the job. That's the general principle. And the way we certify that is that you have to get a labor certificate from the Department of Labor, which says that there is no Bahamian available for that job. And so in theory, once that moves quite smoothly, then no Bahamian should be out of a job that can be done by a Bahamian. Now, there's some exceptions to that, and I suppose you can come to that in the discussion point, but the exceptions are mainly situations where investors want their own representatives to be here to watch their money. But apart from those kind of limited exceptions, the principle is Bahamians have the first call on any jobs.
To what extent do you think we've really been successful at achieving this objective?
Difficult to say because there's so much chipping away at the edges. I think that when people are in their kind of nationalistic mood, everybody is quite fervent about this. And I described it this way when I first got the portfolio, is that Bahamians are in the macro sense for Bahamianization, but in the micro sense, they want you to give the exception for the person they want to hire.
Well, I mean, this ties in with recent discussions, for example, where we've seen in the context of our profession, the legal profession, where there have been calls for the opening up of the sector to allow non-Bahamians to practice. You think we're open to that? You think we'll move in that direction?
No, I think there's a great deal of resistance to it. It's made nationalistically based. I'm not sure that if you look at the pure economics and foreign trade aspects of it, that it's entirely properly based, because there is an argument which is made that sometimes by hiring expatriates you actually expand the Bahamian workforce. But it's not a discussion that you can have very rationally. I mean, people are very emotional on the subject. And so a minister is really a gatekeeper and not an adventurist in that sense.
Well, let's talk about that as minister. When you look at the Department of Immigration, what would you say are your, let's start on a good note. Since taking office, what would you say have been your major successes?
I think first of all, imbuing in the department, I hope, a sense that they should work more or less on automatic, that there's a set of principles they ought to apply, and they ought to apply across the board, regardless of the station in life that the person finds themselves in. That said, there's some issues which concern me. One is the fact that despite our best efforts, we're not able to get work permit applications, permanent resident applications dealt with in a timely fashion. Resource challenged severely. It takes 4 to 6 weeks now after a decision is actually made to grant a work permit, for example, before the permit can actually get in a person's hands. That's unacceptable. Takes 3 months for the matter to be considered, sometimes as long as a year. That too is unacceptable. And in a situation where we have a modern, dynamic country, where we expect commerce to go at a clip, we have to do much to improve that.
You see technology helping with that, additional human resources. What's the action plan to deal with that? A similar problem or challenge at the passport office, for example?
Yes. Well, I think that in the entire public administration, there are a couple of issues. One is human resources training, attitude, equipment, and then just generally resources to do the job. But the more difficult one is the attitude, and I just had the experience because I knew what was coming with the passport office, which is what you talked about. And so I went down to the passport office, had a meeting with the staff and management, and spoke to them about the issues which I saw coming. And the very thing I wanted to avoid happened. Headlines in the newspapers again. So I put the question to them. I said, well, is the passport office sensitive to public opinion? I mean, we serve the public. The public is always right, as far as I'm concerned. Whatever they demand, we have to do our best to meet those demands or lower the expectations about what can be delivered. As it turns out, we're unable to produce passports on a regular basis in less than 6 weeks because of the challenges of equipment and the demands. But I told them, as you counterbalance that with the fact that in Britain it now takes 6 months to get a passport, and their passport office is in a bit of shambles. So we have a lot of work to do, but the attitude is the main thing. And I think on both sides, because I also ask people not to be abusive to the staff, because the staff does in fact have challenges which we are unable to meet at the present time given our resource challenges.
And if you listen to people talk, that's a very general statement, you would find, or you would hear, the general sentiment is that customer experience and customer service is a challenge across the board, whether we look at the public sector or the private sector. So I guess there's an opportunity there for training and that sort of thing. But
beyond just the one-off training that you get or the training that you get from time to time, there's something in the educational system, period, that we have to adjust. Culturally, that we have to adjust about this and the whole attitude toward how you deliver service.
And maybe performance-based, but I don't know the extent to which we rate individuals and their performance, and maybe do customer service surveys, more private sector tools, try to introduce them to the public sector to see if we can build action plans to improve the experience. But that will come with time.
Well, no question about it. It can be done. The issue, of course, with the public service is that in many cases, from ministerial level on down, I think the way the British put it is you have responsibility but no authority. So there's effectively no discipline that you can exercise. That's the problem.
Now, you talked about work permits and what is being done to speed up the process, but the whole, I guess, I'm aware of a rollover policy, for example, in Cayman, where a person gets a work permit for a set amount of time. After that time, that's it. There may be an exception to that. They come back in, but after that, they're entitled to apply for permanent residency. Are there any moves afoot to try and align our process of granting work permits to that of other Caribbean countries, or say a Cayman, to refine the process and maybe set limits on how long persons can get work permits for?
The answer is yes. The short answer is yes. Getting there is a bit of a problem. The Ministry of Trade is responsible for the promotion of this country's financial services sector, and we work very closely with them trying to develop products which are saleable for the Bahamas. One of the products, for example, is permanent residence in the country, which is done on an accelerated basis if you invest $1.5 million. We're supposed to be able to turn that around in 21 days. Can't do it. Haven't been able to do it since I became minister, met the policy in place. One of the difficulties, for example, is that vetting has to take place by the police, and very often the police can't produce the vetting within 12 months. So we have a lot of issues that we have to resolve. Now, one of the ways we try to deal with this is to put in some interim measures so that you can issue the permit, for example, subject to various things. So that's a way of dealing with it. But it's a work in progress, very much a work in progress.
You've been rather innovative to the extent that I've heard pronouncements that your ministry, and in fact you personally, have been engaged more on that investment side, going out there and trying to get business for the country, almost collaborating with the other relevant ministries. Why was that so important to you?
Look, this country depends on imports. Everything we produce hardly anything, not even the food. The food bill is in the hundreds of millions of dollars every year. So, okay.
As minister, you've been quite innovative, engaging your partners such as the Ministry of Trade and Investment, Financial Services, such that you have been a part of our efforts to bring business into the country. Why was that so important to you?
Well, look, the country imports almost everything, even the food, in the hundreds of millions is our bill. Our dollar has a derived value, which is taken from the value of the U.S. dollar. So in order for us to survive, there's got to be capital brought in from the outside because our own currency has no intrinsic value. So you have to do that by direct foreign investment or by trade. And developing markets overseas, developing relationships overseas attracts new money, and that's it, plain and simple. Unfortunately, we've had in the last decade to prop up the reserves by resorting to the money markets to do that, and that's not a good thing to be doing because you're running up the national debt. So the thing to do is attract foreign trade and get some fresh money here.
Absolutely. So we've talked a bit about the immigration policy, work permits, your role as minister. A vexing issue is illegal immigration, especially from our neighbors to the south. I saw recently where the government was engaged in bilateral talks with Haiti. What was on the agenda during those talks, and what can we expect to see in terms of outcomes?
On the agenda was simply to get the Haitian government's commitment to utilize the resources that they have to try and stop it, to put a stop at it. And if they can't stop it, to allow us to make some input on the ground in Haiti to try and put a stop to it. And that means intelligence, that means, boots on the ground, and that means applying our resources to the extent we can to put a stop to it. We want to use the resources of the Haitian government to send out a message in the public relations sense that people should not come. It's a dangerous journey to make. People have lost their lives doing it. But in any event, if they do come, they're going to get caught and sent back home. And it's an expensive journey to make for most people. So that's the outcome we hope. We also hope that we have an agricultural agreement with them so that we can take the exports of their goods that are produced there, which will be more cheap for the vendors here in the Bahamas, and we hope that there's an expansion of business ties as well.
You're optimistic. I mean, we've been talking about this for a while. We've talked about technical cooperation, and it seems to be something that just won't go away.
Well, I'm always optimistic. I think it's difficult. Haiti's in the midst of always in the midst of some political issues internally. Nicolette Bethel said something once. She appeared before a forum at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and she said people keep complaining about Haitians coming to the Bahamas, and she said, well, here's a solution I got for you. She says, Bahamas is a rich country. and Haiti is a poor country. So the reason why Haitians come to the Bahamas is because they want to move to a better life, from a poor country to a rich country. So here's how you solve the problem. Let the Bahamas become a poor country, and they'll start coming.
Yeah.
So that's the irony of it.
Yeah,
it's driven by economics.
Absolutely.
Migration is a natural state of human beings. In fact, migration helps our country because these people, despite the fact that they're despised by many people, have in fact contributed to the building up of the common life of this country. So there's a careful, delicate balancing act with this. What you don't want, of course, is undocumented migrants coming to the Bahamas, because that undermines the national security of the country, and that's what we're determined to stop.
And that's all migrants, because we tend to only put the lens on Haitians coming into the country. But in terms of our efforts to combat other nationalities coming in illegally?
Well, I just had the experience on the weekend in Eleuthera at our mini convention there, where people were talking about property managers who are Americans who come in under the guise of being tourists, and suddenly they're working in Eleuthera without work permits, or they come in as so-called permanent residents or second home owners, and suddenly they're doing work in these islands. Complaints also in Exuma about the same thing. So, and what they were concerned about is we have had 2 interdictions or road checks in Eleuthera over the last year, and they're saying, but you know, all you do is you just question the Haitians, but anyone who's not a Haitian, you just don't do anything at all, because it's assumed that they're there lawfully. So there are double standards that people see. We try not to have that operate on the minds of immigration officers, to treat everybody fairly and without discrimination, but we have to put a stop to it.
And the reality is that there is a shared responsibility, because we as citizens have to be the eyes and the ears of immigration. So if we are aware of something going on, then really the duty falls on us, where possible, to alert officials to what we see going on, such that action can be taken.
And I think to what I said to the audience in Eleuthera was that what they have to do is they themselves have to become advocates to stand up for the Bahamas, because too often what happens is immigration goes and does some interdiction somewhere, and then the foreign employer says, if you do this again, I'm going to shut down my operation in the Bahamas, and everybody goes all wobbly.
Right, and we've seen that.
Yeah.
We've seen that.
Yeah.
Now, once we would have caught an illegal immigrant, there's the detention center.
Right.
In terms of, what's the average stay that an individual would be at the detention center?
Usually within 7 days we can turn around a deportation to Port-au-Prince. Cuba, more like 21 days. Other nationalities, quite problematic because you don't have the direct flights.
The spotlight has been on the detention center, alleged human rights abuses. I know that there was an inquiry into that, and I guess we can't preempt what the outcome of that report, but just in general terms, what safeguards are there in place to ensure that there are no human rights abuses?
Well, the place is constantly reviewed by a visiting committee. It is open to anyone who wishes to go and inspect it, from international agencies ranging from the Red Cross to Amnesty International. My view is quite simple. The place is open, and people should have the ability to go and have a look at what's going on there. And we need to put in place, of course, rules for its governance, which are not now in place. There was a report which was just done by a former judge, Justice Osadabe. And that committee has made certain recommendations that we're trying to execute right now to improve the overall conditions there.
Yeah, because I think the mindset, people tend to see it as a person being incarcerated, but really it's just at a detention.
It's a holding facility.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Yeah, it shouldn't be a prison. Now, certain people have been removed to the prison because they proved to be security problems, like setting fires and those kinds of things. But and that's an issue because there are a few long-term people who have been in custody too long, and the problem is they're not wanted back in their home countries, and there are no third countries that are willing to take them. So we have to make a decision soon with regard to those people.
Okay. So I read where the U.S. State Department recently issued its report on the trafficking of persons, and it says that we have made some progress in that area. They alluded to, well, they touched on the fact that we've had our first conviction in this area. What sort of resources are being placed, perhaps in your ministry as well as other law enforcement agencies, to deal with trafficking in persons?
Well, trafficking in persons is handled through the Ministry of National Security.
Okay.
I mean, we deal with the issue of relations with the United States that has this odd system of reviewing other countries and calling them out on these different matters, which is as a matter of policy, we disagree with this approach. It's not helpful, but the Bahamian public seems to take quite a interest in these things, and also there are sanctions which the United States invokes if you are not at one level or another in this tip process. So it's a matter which we take very seriously for those reasons, but quite apart from the fact that we are, as a former slave country, we are against modern day slavery, and we have to do everything to stop that. So the resources of the country have been mobilized behind training for police officers, sensitivity training for social workers and police officers and defense force officers, immigration, all these people, to be able to spot human trafficking when it takes place. And simple things like this. Employers should know that in the case of foreign employees in this country, you can't keep their passports. People have been taking passports from people,
taking their work permits, or
that's right, and saying they're holding it for safekeeping. That's a no-no, and that's the new standard. People have to be free to move. They can't be imprisoned in any way. They have to get their wages on a regular basis, and in particular, women and children. We have to be sure that women and children are not being abused.
Excellent. Now we'll turn to foreign affairs.
Sure.
You get spanked a little bit with respect to your busy travel schedule.
Right.
But I think it's important for our country to be represented on the world stage. But for our viewers, why is it important for you to be visible? Why do you have to be there?
Well, I chuckle a little bit because just had a visit from the foreign minister of Malaysia, and he was sitting with the prime minister, and he was saying that he's been out of his country for 4 months with only one visit for a week. So the prime minister said, "Fred, you are forgiven."
You have to put it in perspective.
He thought I'd put the minister up to say that. But and as it happens, as he was going downstairs getting into his car to leave, the opposition spokesman on foreign affairs showed up. So I said to the minister, "Let me introduce you to Mr. Chipman. This is the one who says I keep traveling all the time." And so they had a good chuckle. We're building relationships. No matter what you want to do or say about the modern era, at the end of the day, relationships count on face-to-face contact.
Absolutely.
And so it's necessary to be there. It's necessary not to be absent from various fora to get these decisions executed in favor of our country. And, foreign affairs is something where people have no interest in it until, of course, they try to cross the border and their visa gets turned back or their passport expires, and then suddenly everybody's interested in foreign affairs. So you're really setting the stage for that marginal moment when you need to get someone on the phone in another country to help resolve a problem, and you do that by building up relationships.
Well, let's talk a bit about those relationships, or our relationships. In a nutshell, how would you define our relationship, our foreign policy, as it relates, for example, the United States at this point in time?
Well, they're our closest friend and trading partner. We're joined at the hip. A complex relationship. It's not an easy relationship. It's a complex relationship because Bahamians are very proud of their country. We're small, very independent-minded, but in many senses we're dependent on the United States for our survival. I've said, however, to the staff that does not mean there isn't the space between those two issues, that is our independence and our dependence. There isn't the space to make your own way. And the United States, being the kind of country that it is, allows that space. I mean, I always quote Arthur Hanna, who used to be the Governor General, and he was welcoming South Korean ambassador to the Bahamas. And he said, we have something in common. says we're nestled next to giants, and our independence is only as much as the giants allow. So that puts it in very graphic. South Korea is right next to China, and China's the big boy in that neighborhood. The United States is the big boy in this neighborhood, and we depend on them. But at the same time, there's a way they have to conduct their affairs with us, and it has to be with respect, regardless of our size. And I think they do.
Okay, well, that sort of leads me nicely into the question that everybody's been talking about, and that's the question of alleged spying, the NSA. And I know it's being investigated. In terms of your ministry and what we're doing to move that investigation forward, can you tell our viewers what you've done?
Well, we've been on to them at the highest levels. I wrote John Kerry, told him that this is a matter which has caused great agitation in the country, and we need to have some answers from them. Spoke to an Assistant Secretary of State when I was down in Paraguay. They promised that they're going to get back to us with some answers or some report. I'm hopeful, but if I don't get answers, we will determine what the truth or otherwise is of this matter from our own agencies. And my own view is that if it is discovered to be true, it must be stopped, and that it must be brought to an end, and we must ensure that it doesn't happen again.
Okay. In terms of our relations with China, so our closest ally is the United States, and then there is China. What are our relations like with China?
There are two areas in the world now that are sources of excess capital, that are in capital surplus. One is China, the other is the Middle East. So China's been a supplier of capital for the Bahamas. You see the Bahamar project, which is going out west. They supplied their capital for that, and so that has been of great benefit to the Bahamas. Their foreign policy is looking for support on the One China policy. And most often that manifests itself in support in the United Nations for their various positions, which we support. So the relationship is good. There's also been great people-to-people exchange. We've had our students. We have students over there. We exchange language. We have language training for Bahamians. They are going to be, by all estimates, by the year 2030 maybe, or just beyond, the largest economy in the world. So we need to get to know them. We need to know how that operates. Their sphere of influence is obviously going to be quite a lot wider and broader than it is. We want to allow trading in their currency here in the Bahamas as a means of attracting people to the foreign financial services sector here. So there's a lot of scope for development with them, and they're not intrusive in our internal affairs.
To what extent does that put strain on our U.S. relations?
I don't think it does. It came up at the meeting that Vice President Biden had with the heads of government of the Caribbean and Trinidad. And he said, that we're happy that the Chinese are providing the sources of capital. God bless you. There was a statement also by the Assistant Secretary of State for Western Hemisphere, Roberta Jacobson, and she also indicated that they had no issues with it. Nevertheless, this thing in the Bahamas where at least sometimes you go to voters and they say, are you going to vote for me, or do you have any issues? And they say, no, no, no. And by the way they say no, you know that it actually means yes. So you have to be careful with that a guy's telling you, no, there are no problems, but there are problems. So we're sensitive to watching it because the relationship with the United States is relationship one. And so obviously we have to protect it.
Okay. I saw recently where you were in the UK, and the UK would have put two questions to us, one relative to exchange of information as it relates to tax, and a registry, a beneficiary registry. And we took a position on that. What was our position?
Well, the thing is, Foreign Affairs can't go overseas and make a commitment of the kind they were asking, which is to have this beneficial ownership registry where people could just go and find out who the beneficial owners of trusts and companies. I mean, that just seems...
And it could decimate a sector.
I would have thought. And then the automatic information exchange on tax matters. Again, this may be an evolving standard, but that's not something that a foreign minister can go and commit to in the absence of more. Now, as it stands, our Minister of Trade trade is on his way to Europe in a short while to visit with the OECD that's been setting these standards. And we have a difficulty. Philosophically, we say that there's a role for privacy, that there are reasons for privacy, particularly as it relates to your wealth. I told the British Foreign Office Minister, Haig, in fact, the foreign minister, that there was a time in Italy when the gangs were all around and attacking people. So rich people used to dress down. They wouldn't go out in their jewelry or their expensive clothes because you made yourself a target. So when you start exposing your wealth around, you become a target for people. So you have a real security interest in ensuring that your wealth is kept private. Not that you're trying to do anything unlawful or illegal, but you're trying to protect your own safety and security. So that is something which we sell here in the Bahamas, and we can't give it up lightly. And it should not be an imposed standard, but a negotiated result.
Absolutely. Now we're winding down now, but when you look back at your time as minister, what would you like for your legacy to be?
That I've established a proper Ministry of Foreign Affairs with a set of procedures and policies in place that can stand the test of time. One of the things, for example, is we have no visa regulations to this day as to who applies and so on and so forth. So I'd like all of those things to be in place, to have a proper foreign service. And to generally have contributed to the development of the public administration. I am from a generation of politicians that really we're the technocratic generation. We're not the ones who invented the country and set up the systems. We're the ones who have to run it and evolve it. And we are handing off to a group of younger people who will have to have both the history of the establishment of the country as we passed it back to them, but also the changes which took place. We're handing those things off to them so that they can evolve the system to serve the generation that they will have to serve. So that's what I think my contribution will be, is hopefully to the better public administration of the country and its systems, and a country that is more technocratic in its approach to how you resolve problems. I indicate, my colleagues think it's idiosyncratic, that in our public ceremonies, for example, I wish that nothing goes beyond 60 minutes. Tony Blair said once that he couldn't see why he should hold a cabinet
and some go on for hours.
Minutes.
Yeah.
So as a routine, within 60 minutes, I think it's enough. So we have to move toward that more efficient direction.
To a viewer who is interested in a career in the Foreign Service, what recommendation, how would they open that door?
Well, you have to have a good first degree. Any subject will do, even if it's mathematics. You just have to have a good sound degree, something which trains you in thinking. I think you have to be outward looking in your thinking and like people, be able to get along with people. And I think also in your formative years, to have a sense of what this country is, get to know the country, because you got to know it inside and out, and have a sense of what you would do if you were in the seat. And if you come to the table with those things, that's a good start to get a job in the Foreign Service.
Excellent. Minister, our time is up, but you've given us a wonderful insight into immigration. We've looked at foreign affairs and our foreign policy. And for those young viewers out there who perhaps want to sit in your chair or serve in the public service, I think they've gotten a lot of information that can help them.
Sure. I'd just like to say, thanks to my constituents who allow me to have such a wonderful job.
Excellent. Right. Thank you very much. To you, our viewers, if you have questions for the minister, you can email me at roundtable@cablebahamas.com. I'll make sure that he gets those questions or comments. I trust that you found this show to be insightful. You see the role that immigration and foreign affairs plays in our national development. I want to thank you for watching and remind you that here at the Round Table, the issue is always at hand.